Hi, my name is Siobhan. I was really stressed lately and needed a break away, so decided to pack up work for a week and book myself into a lovely looking hotel in a really nice resort in Florida. Judging by the photos online of it, the place was exactly what I needed. I just needed to get away from everything for a few days, so hopefully a week would do the job. When I had all my luggage packed, I got the cab to the airport and was on my way to Florida. I was so happy knowing I would spend the next week away from all the stress of everything that was going on lately. I was very confident I would feel so much better after the break. When I arrived, I checked in and got the elevator up to my room, left my baggage and headed straight for the beach. It was so relaxing just lying down on the beach with the air blowing in my face. I felt like I was just about to feel the benefits of what I'd feel spending a whole week in this beautiful resort. That night I was in the hotel's bar and I was feeling kind of fed up, thinking that in a week I'd be back to my ordinary life and the troubles and stress will be waiting right for me. But I knew I just had to make the most of being here. Suddenly a guy walked up to me in the bar and said to me, "Hello, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I just saw you sitting there and you looked kind of lonely and a bit fed up, to be honest. And I was wondering, would you like some company?" I looked strangely at first, wondering, did I really look that fed up? And then I replied, "Well, sure, thanks. I guess I'd enjoy some company." The man asked, "So, where are you from?" I told him I was from New York and decided I needed to have a break away from the stress in the Big Apple. He smiled and said, "Do you know something? That makes a lot of sense to me, and trust me, this place is like a paradise. If you like, I can show you around sometime." I smiled and said, "Sure, that sounds like fun." Then the man said, "Oh, by the way, pardon my manners, I didn't even ask your name. My name is Sam. What's yours?" "My name is Siobhan. Nice to meet you, Sam." The next day, I was relaxing on the beach with Sam. He spoke. "To be honest, when I saw you alone and looking kind of down, I had to come and say hello." I looked confused and asked him why. He replied, "A few weeks ago there was this beautiful girl who was sitting by herself in the bar, just like you were, and well, she looked to be upset over something. I was going to introduce myself and ask her would she like company, but I didn't. And well, the next day I found out she was after committing suicide by jumping off her room's balcony. I felt so sorry for the girl and told Sam that there was no way of him knowing she was so upset and was going to commit suicide. That night me and Sam were in the bar having a few drinks and speaking. I wondered would it be too soon. When we were in my room, we sat on the bed and had another drink. Sam stood up and said to me, "Do you know what I love most about this hotel? The beautiful view from the balcony." We both walked out to the balcony and were admiring the view. I said to him, "It's beautiful." Suddenly Sam put his hand on my back and was about to push me over when I took my taser out of my pocket and tasered him. He jumped back, feeling surprised I was ready for him. Then I said, "That girl you were telling me committed suicide. We both know that she didn't jump." Then I held my phone up and showed him a picture that was taken of him without his knowledge, with text underneath it saying, "Help, call the police, this man is going to kill me." I called the hotel and asked for my friend Lisa, who you pushed, but when they had sadly confirmed to me she had committed suicide, then I had an expert in facial recognition do a background check on you, and boy was I happy to know that you were working in this hotel. I knew the police would let you off, so I have my own idea of justice. Also, thanks so much for letting me know what type of lunatic you are by wanting to push me off the balcony also. But I'd just like to know why. Why would you want to kill an innocent woman after just killing an innocent woman just a few weeks ago? With that, the door was knocked open, and I heard police shout, "Stop, police!" They walked over to me, and they couldn't even see the damn man lying on the ground. I was cursing this hotel's CCTV footage for picking up my face and letting them finally see me when they were looking for me for months. And I was wondering why, because I knew I was on the run, but didn't know why. It was months later I had learned there was no man. I suffer from a condition called dissociative disorder, which means I was the man, but there was never a man, and it was me who killed my friend. Susan had a very real fear against fire, and it started when she went out for a few groceries a year ago and left her washing machine on. She never even thought that it could catch on fire. When she came back from doing her groceries, she was shocked to the core when she saw that her house was on fire, and the fire was so bad she had to use her insurance money to buy another house. She promised herself that she would never ever leave on any appliance ever again overnight when she left her house, or when she wasn't looking at it to see was everything okay. She plugged out the TV, radio, washing machine and dryer. She switched the oven off. She didn't smoke, so didn't have that worry at least. All Susan's life, she felt tiny feelings that afterwards explained themselves. For instance, she once was on her way to school when she was 8, and she felt a strange dizziness. She didn't tell anyone, but that day in school, her friends spun her around, fooling, and when she finally stood on her own, she felt dizzy. Before the fire had happened in her house, Susan had felt very hot. She never even guessed it was because there would have been a fire about to engulf her whole home. It was one night Susan felt a strange feeling. She felt hot, but also felt cold. Most people would say it was just a fever, and she hoped that that was all it was, a simple fever. She made sure to plug out the appliances, TV, washing machine, etc., as always. She lay in bed worried. Was her feverish hot and cold feeling a warning that there will be another fire in her house? She eventually fell asleep. She was dreaming about a fire brigade, and there was a fire alarm blending in with the siren until she realized she was awake and her fire alarm was ringing. She panicked and jumped out of bed, and when she opened her door, smoke spread all around her fast. She rushed downstairs and wondered how anything could have went on fire. When she plugged out everything, she froze in fright when she saw her fridge had caught on fire, and knew now that was the one appliance she couldn't plug out, because how could she? No one would. She rang the fire brigade, and thankfully they arrived and put the fire out before it did any real damage. But her biggest fear was, what would she do about the fridge, and how could she turn it off without spoiling her food? She would never be able to sleep easy knowing her fridge was plugged in. That was the one appliance she never, ever guessed would be the one she had to plug out. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content.
The boys in homeroom were talking about it. They were like the Hardy Boys, but there were 3 of them. They were always talking about some adventure they just had. They had even invited me a few times, but I was always too chicken. One time, they jumped the fence at the quarry. Another time, they went to the old abandoned mall near the sealed-off freeway that no one used anymore. This time, they were talking about a cave. It wasn't far from my house, at least that's what Miles said. It was in the woods behind my backyard, about a half-mile down. But it wasn't the cave they were talking about. Well, it was and it wasn't. See, Miles said he had heard something there, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. He said a voice was calling him to go inside. The others thought maybe they heard something, but they couldn't be sure. Miles wanted to go in, but the others said no, and as much as they wanted to, they just hadn't come prepared. Mickey said that it looks like you'd easily get lost because it was so dark. But tonight they'd bring flashlights and one of the big, long dock line ropes Chris's dad had down at the boatyard. It was sturdy, and if they tied it to something outside the cave, it'd keep them from getting lost in there. They invited me. When I said yes, they all froze. "You're going in first, then," Mickey said. That dumb, freckled smile and greaser hair always made me want to punch him. We all met up that night by my house around midnight. I followed them as they walked single file straight through the woods. It was easy enough to find the cave, half-mile down, just like Miles said. It looked like a big open mouth, black inside and totally hollow. "There's someone in there," Miles told me. I stared at it with the others expecting me to go in first. He said he wasn't trying to scare me, but he knew it was true. There was something in there. He had heard it himself. I nearly peed my pants just looking at it. I told them I couldn't do it. They laughed. Then Mickey tied the rope to a tree outside and told me to wait for them. He said if they hadn't come back in an hour, I should tell someone. So I sat there and guarded the rope. At first it went taut because they used it to help them go down the initial slope just past the mouth of the cave. Just after a minute or so, the rope went slack, and they called to me saying that they were going a bit deeper. I said okay, and I sat there in the woods. That was the scariest night of my life. Normally, the woods would be the scariest part. I didn't even like looking at them from my bedroom window at night. Something about them always felt sinister, even during the day, to be honest. They never felt like nature usually does. But this time, it wasn't the towering trees or the whispering of the wind slithering through the leaves that terrified me. This time, it was the cave. From where I sat, it was just a wide opening with darkness so thick it could even be a curtain. Someone could have been standing there staring at me, and I would have never known it. The sun woke me up. It was dawn. It had been 5 hours since they went into the cave. I moved to the entryway and screamed, but there was no answer. I told my mom everything, and she called the police. The policemen could hardly fit in the tunnels past the slope. They tried everything they could, but nothing worked. 2 weeks later, the search was called off. I had nightmares pretty much every night for a year after that. On days I couldn't sleep, I would sit up, looking at the woods behind my house, waiting for them to come walking out. They never did, of course. I never heard a single thing about them. Some people even tried going into the caves to look for anything they could find, but they all said it was just too tight to get anywhere after the slope near the opening. My senior year, people were finally starting to forget. It was almost like it was an urban legend, like it hadn't really happened. I was okay with that. I wanted to forget. One night, I woke up to a knocking at my front door. It was still the middle of the night. I was so groggy, I wasn't sure I was even really awake or not. I followed the sound of the knocking all the way downstairs and opened the door. But there was no one there. Then I heard the knocking again and realized it had been coming from behind me, from the basement door. Now I was sure I was awake. And I was scared. Every few seconds, it would come again. Knock, knock, knock. I was scared to open it, but I was frozen there, too afraid to run. So I opened the door. Miles was walking down the stairs already. The light in the basement was off, so he was just barely visible. He turned back and looked at me. "You have to come to the cave," he said. "We're still down there." He turned to go back down. Just before he did, his eyes glistened yellow in the half-light. He walked into the dark and vanished. I tried to convince myself that it had been a dream, but something inside wouldn't let me believe it. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it was true? What if they were still down there? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mouth of the cave, just like that night. I felt like all it wanted was for me to go inside. I kept thinking about the tunnels. What if there was one right beneath me as I saw in class? What if all three boys were only a few feet away from me, right beneath the surface? It would have been the easiest thing, just staying put, keeping to the surface. The risk was all below. Just knowing it was there, knowing I would never have an answer to what happened to those guys unless I went in. I found myself going in there one day, when it was still light out, with nothing but a flashlight in hand. I figured I'd just cross the threshold, look around for a second, and come back up. Maybe the pulling, the incessant thinking about it would finally stop if I just went inside, just for a second. When I got there, it wasn't so scary, so I walked inside. The cave was wide, wider than I would have thought. It sloped down so that just after you had gone in, you were already too deep to see the opening behind you unless you looked up, which I did. The cave stretched on beneath me. It was steep, but not so much that it caused much concern. I figured if I was really desperate, I could climb back up pretty easily. So I slid down, following the beam of my light, down and down the wide open cave. Finally, I came to the edge of the slope. There was a drop, only about 7 feet down. I aimed my light. It seemed like a flat platform and a way to keep going straight. I could only see a foot or two into the corridor. The walls were full of rocks that stuck out. I could climb up if I wanted, so I sat on the ledge and pushed myself off. landing on the platform. "Hello?" I called at the edge of the corridor. My voice carried, bouncing off the walls and fading into the dark. The feeling that had brought me here didn't dissipate as I moved deeper into the cave. It was just the opposite. The feeling got more and more intense, like I was always right on the edge of finding out the mysteries of the cave. So I went into the corridor. It wasn't super wide, but not too narrow either. I had to turn to walk sideways and fit comfortably, but that was okay. Behind me, the light from outside was starting to fade. In front, there was only the yellow beam of my flashlight bounding against the rock, which got sharper and sharper as I walked on. By the time I reached the end of the corridor, they were sharp as knives. There was another slight slope down. Beyond that, I wasn't sure. My light couldn't reach. I slid down, but the slope was so smooth I almost slipped and fell. At the bottom, I turned my light back and saw the slope was just as big as the first one. Only it was steeper, and there was nothing to hold on to. I tried climbing back up, but even as I did, I knew there was no turning back. And as much as I wanted to leave, I still felt like it wasn't done. Just a little further, I thought. I was almost there. The tunnel ahead wasn't wide like the first. In fact, it was exactly as wide as I was. I pushed in, both my arms grazing the sides. Each step was tighter than the last, and worse yet, it was always going down. I realized that ever since I had entered the cave, I had been steadily moving deeper underground, always going down. I must have gone at least a quarter of a mile below the surface by now. There was no turning back. I just had to hope I would find something that the other boys didn't. The beam of my flashlight grew dim, but there wasn't much to see anyway because it got so thin ahead. The ceiling of the cave wall dipped down and my only option became simply to go with it, until it got so thin that I was on my stomach. There wasn't enough room to pull myself forward by my arms, so I had to belly crawl 1 inch at a time. My right arm was fully extended out in front of me, the flashlight shaking as I moved. And still the ground sloped down, always deeper. Every moment that passed, I was farther from the surface. I thought the cave would have some logic to its passages, but I was wrong. There was no rhyme or reason for why the tunnels would turn right, or the ground would suddenly give way. And yet, no matter how narrow or awkward, there was always enough room for me to pass through. Like it had been made for human bodies to inhabit it. Made by something beyond comprehension. And then, just as my light was beginning to truly die out, the narrow passageway I had to push and struggle through, ripping my clothes and tearing my skin, finally opened up. I was elated. My lungs could fill again without the pain of jagged rocks scraping my ribs. But the feeling didn't last. There was nothing ahead. No passage. But there was something below. Water. Black. Nearly invisible. I stepped in it, thinking it was a puddle. My foot sank down to my shins before I caught myself on the edge. First, I tried to go back the way I came, but the protruding rocks cut into my stomach. They all faced toward me so that when I was moving toward them, they only scraped my skin, but now, if I moved the other way, they would rip into me. There was no going back. I could stand here in the little pocket and die, or I could drop into that black hole in the ground and risk not only being stuck, but drowning at the same time. The water bubbled, and I wondered if there was something beneath the surface. Something that had called me here. Called Miles here all that time ago. But then another thought struck me. This one so horrible I wished I could have taken it back as soon as I had it. The mouth of the cave, the long, twisting tunnels, the warmth of it against my skin. It all felt so alive. What if it was? What if Miles hadn't been called by something in the cave, but by the cave itself? What if the water moves because it was still digesting their bones? My light finally went out, and I was left with nothing but a darkness so absolute, it too felt alive. Like there was someone standing so close to me. I couldn't see anything at all. Yellow eyes stared up from the black pool beneath me. They quickly sank into the depths. I stood there, frozen and trembling, my mind reeling. Had I really seen them? I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe an hour, maybe 5. My joints were locking up, and the silence around me began to sound like voices. I would move, and my feet would scrape the ground, and I would realize just how quiet it had really been. The dread of my situation began to set in, and I made my decision. I would dive into the black pool. There was no other way. I closed my eyes, which had already filled with tears, and I took a deep breath. I jumped inside. As soon as I did, I knew there was no coming back up the same way. The tunnel was about 5 feet deep. Below, the space opened up into a vast black ocean. I hoped to reach the bottom so I could trudge along the floor to find the wall, but I only kept sinking. Beneath me, there was only emptiness. There was no floor. I could see nothing, of course, but to me it felt infinite, like I was slowly falling down an endless void. The air in my lungs pushed against my ribs, desperate to be let out. Then something swam past me. I couldn't tell what it was. A giant, ancient creature, a skeletal boy who now lived in the labyrinth. Or maybe it wasn't something separate and apart from the cave. Maybe it was a part of it, like a tendril or a pulsing vein. My lungs burned. I opened my mouth. The water rushed in. It flooded every part of me. I woke up choking. All at once, it felt so ridiculous. Of course it had been a dream. It had to be. Once I caught my breath again, I lay down, trying to calm myself. I watched the ceiling, and as I drifted off again, I could have sworn the pattern on the drywall began to swirl. It's been some time since the dream, though how long I can't really be sure. I've moved on from all of that. Even the town is only a memory to me now. I work in the city. I have lunch in the courtyard of one of those new big glass buildings. Every night when I go to sleep, I stare at my ceiling, and just before I fall asleep, sometimes it feels like the world isn't right. It's hard to explain what I mean, but sometimes as I'm going about my day, eating my lunch, sitting on the bus, watching the people on the other side of the window go about theirs. Something feels off. The people around me are always pleasant and fine, but there's something not right about them. And sometimes when I'm alone, I wonder if I'm still there. Still in that cave. Just sinking into nothingness. I wonder if all this time I've been there. I've been sinking. What if I never truly woke up? What if right now I'm in the belly of some great beast that placates my mind while slowly but surely it devours me?
Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you enjoy the content then make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of new content. Susan was looking through old papers and documents in her family home that was standing for over 300 years. She didn't remember her parents that much because they were killed in a freak accident in their garden. She didn't know the details. She had photos of them, and that is all she remembered. She was reading through different documents when she came to a certain one that grabbed her attention instantly. It read, "I put the treasure in the garden for safekeeping." It was signed by her mom. She noticed the date in the diary entry was exactly the same day her mom had her accident. She wondered, was she murdered for the treasure? This kept bothering Susan more and more. When she was out walking, she kept thinking, were her parents murdered for whatever was buried in her garden? She thought all through the years that her parents were in some sort of freak accident, and now she is worried that it was plain, old-fashioned murder. A week later, she had enough of wondering and just had to go out to the garden to dig up the treasure. There was a page that had the exact position of the garden where it would be. She had a pitchfork and shovel and dug until eventually she hit a hard piece of what she guessed was wood. Sure enough, it was a chest, and when she opened it, she smiled, seeing that it was full of what looked like priceless gold and jewels. She came across photos that made her nearly get sick, as there were photos of her parents and what she guessed were her grandparents, with some sort of spike in their eye. She suddenly heard a noise, and her leg slipped, and she fell on the fork, which gouged right into her eye. She screamed, realizing that the spikes in the fork were what were in her parents' and grandparents' eyes. She fell into the hole and screamed when she saw what looked like a white ghost hovering over her, and within seconds she realized there were bones near her, and seconds later she was buried alive. The spirit was of Mason Jeffers, the estranged son who was cut out of his inheritance over 250 years ago. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content. Joseph moved in with his wife Lisa to a house in a secluded area, but that suited him fine. They came from the big bright lights of New York City and wanted to move away from the hectic city lifestyle. At first, Joseph and his wife hated the quietness and stillness of the area. After a few weeks, Joseph found himself going crazy when he was trying to go to sleep at night with the sound of the waterfall nearby. It haunted him, and when he eventually did fall asleep, he dreamt of stormy weather or the waterfall while he was drowning in it. His wife seemed to just sleep through the night, and it never bothered her, no matter how loud or annoying it got. He wished he had earplugs, but couldn't believe they would do any good, as the sound was so loud. It was driving him crazy. The next day when he got up, he just sat down, nearly falling asleep in front of the TV, because he couldn't get no sleep at night. One night it was different. It was almost like the waterfall was calling his name to come to it. The sound felt much, much different. It was like music to his ears. It was like the complete opposite of what it was like before. He was smiling at how appetizing the sound seemed to be. He got up from bed and got dressed and walked towards the waterfall. The noise of it was like beautiful, relaxing, soothing music to his ears. Then suddenly he saw the most beautiful lady. He remembered then. How could he forget? She was just standing next to the waterfall, waiting for him to embrace her, and that is just what he was going to do. Before he saw her skin color change, and then he had realized the horror and what he kept locked away in a box in his mind and never wanted to open again. His wife had drowned in the waterfall a week ago, and he did everything he could to help her, but he just couldn't save her. He then realized who was the woman up in the house with him. Then he realized, of course, there was no woman up in the house with him. It was just his mind and the waterfall playing tricks with him. Thanks for watching The Assassin Rapper, and if you want to stay up to date on new content, then please subscribe and be sure to hit the bell to be notified on new content.